Welcome to part 3 of the Square Twist Samurai tutorial, and today we're going to be shaping. So I think for the most part of this tutorial, we need to finish all the details that are on the crease pattern. So these are like surface details and dry shaping. And then there will be a whole video dedicated to wet shaping. And wet shaping and dry shaping, if you're not familiar with those terms, basically dry shaping will be everything we can do, just still folding and whatever we can to manipulate the paper, start to get an initial set of pose and stuff like that. Like turn this flap into a sword, that sort of thing. And then wet shaping will be getting the model into a finished state. So that would be like posing the legs in the correct orientation. So like you can see right now, the leg, if I want it here and I let go, the paper's memory shoots back this way. Wet shaping allows the paper's memory to change so that it will hold in place in the position we want it to be in, so we can get a cool pose. But yeah, that's the plan for today. Let's get to some of the dry shaping. We have a lot to do. Basically, we have all the square twists to collapse, which we're going to do first. Then we have the face, which is pretty complex, the helmet and the sword, some fingers, the sheath, and then basic leg shaping details and initial posing, as well as the closed back and stuff on this side. So let's get to it. Should be pretty fun. This is always some of the more fun parts. And then, yeah. All right, so let's learn how to do a square twist. Now, if you look at our crease pattern, let's look at the center one. I think this will be the easiest one for me to show, just because it's in the open. But it looks kind of crazy. We don't have to do pre-creases like shown here very accurately. There's a much easier sequence to do to actually get these square twists. So that's why we didn't worry about that before. All right, so let's take a look at our model. And maybe I'll zoom in just a little bit. There we go. Now we have some flaps here, and I'm looking at this one on our waistcoat. So make sure you're doing the same one that I'm doing. Now we have like this top mountain fold. We have a 1 unit flap, another 1 unit flap, and then this longer 3 unit flap here. The square twist, we want to commit 2 flaps in the center generally, and leave like 1 flap above and 1 flap below. That way, when our square twist is complete, it's still framed in this square. So in this case, we're going to be looking between these 2 flaps. Make sure you remember that. Now, the first thing we're going to do is actually valley fold the corners to the center like this. And this is the first, I guess this is a little bit of pre-creasing, but it's not like pre-creasing pre-collapse. This is post-collapse pre-crease. Now, like is the bane of many origami folders, the corners probably won't all perfectly line up to the center, which is totally fine. I think the more important thing here is just to get it kind of as close in the corners as you can, right? And especially like this corner on the left side. But if it's not perfect, it's okay. Because there's so much details being added with these square twists, even if you have a little bit of, inaccuracy, it's not going to be noticeable too much. This last one in here. So yeah, even if you have like this is probably the worst corner on my fold. Right here, there's some extra paper creep. That's totally fine. But we've pre-creased that. Now the next thing we're going to do is lift up the layer on the side like this. See how I'm just lifting 1 layer? And we're going to try to valley fold this layer to the center line. Now you'll notice that it gets stuck because of some of the other creases. What I'm focusing on is just that at least the center, like the very center here where I have the most freedom, touches that middle line in the center, and so it's kind of even. And then once that's done, I am actually just letting the corners fold in like this. And right now mine is folding on top. You can probably have it on top or like a petal fold like this. I don't think it matters too much, but maybe we'll do the petal fold. I think it's a little bit more precise. Like this. And then same thing on the other side. Let's do one each, one petal fold, one non-petal fold, just to see if which one's easier. But I don't think it really matters. All right, so we have that collapsed. And now we are ready to do our square twist. So the square twist occurs from actually this corner now, turning into that square via a squash fold. So I know it's very kind of self-explanatory, but the way you do this squash fold is you can basically lift up some of the layers. So in this case, I'm lifting this top layer with my index finger, and I'm undoing that petal fold on this side. And at the same time, I'm now reaching inside between these layers. And if I start to spread all those layers at the same time, you can see how that pocket opens up and forms roughly a square. Now, this corner on the bottom is a little bit stuck, so I don't want to squash it until I'm kind of happy with the square shape. So sometimes what you have to do is like forcibly grab one of the corners that's kind of causing a problem and just very gently pushing on the top to get it to open a little bit more evenly. And once it's, you know, relatively there, you can then refold it and complete that square twist. Like there. And in my case, this bottom corner really isn't enjoying itself. So if you can't squash fold it exactly, what I'm going to do is once it's open like this, where I think it should be a square, I'm actually going to press and add a mountain fold discreetly like that. And that will help it to squash in the position that I want it to be in. Once it's closed back up. Like that. And so yeah, it's not perfect, right? But that's okay. We're going to have so many of these that, you know, that it's okay if it's not that perfect. You just want it to roughly be a square shape. We're going to do the bottom side now, just to even things out. So once again, I want to hold from this side, lift some of the corners up like this. So I'm using my index finger and thumb, and then I'm using my other finger inside of these layers like this, and just opening that pocket, getting the corner to slightly open like that, and then very gently pushing on that corner to open it. Once again, I'm going to do it a little bit 3D so I can get the creases I want into the square shape I want, very gently like this. There you go. Looks good. Looks good. Maybe this side's a little bit too big. Like that. And then let's get a little bit more on this side. There you go. And now we can twist it to complete that squash fold. And we'll be good. And my paper is a little bit irresponsive here, so I'm just going to try to very gently push that paper in that crease out so it's not stuck. And it really doesn't like it, so I'm going to maybe try to open up underneath all the layers so I can push that corner very gently. So as you can see, this process, it's a delicate process. You want to take care of each of these square twists. The maneuver is pretty easy, but depending on what paper you're using, it might give you problems, like mine's giving me problems. But sometimes you'll have really easy ones. Sometimes you'll have ones that are a little bit more stubborn. But just work through it gently and try to get those square twists as square as possible. There we go. All right, so we have the first two done on this side. Not the greatest looking, but that's okay. Now we're going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Now, I think one thing I forgot to do is if you want a little bit of a reference for where to actually do your square, you can fold this corner to the crease that we made earlier very gently. And this kind of pre-creases the square outline. It's not really going to allow you to squash it any easier, but it might give you a visual outline on, where to go. So that can kind of help sometimes while you're collapsing. So let's go ahead and do that for this side. We can just compare. Maybe this will help us out. All right, and then our first step is now to open that layer on the side and make the valley fold to the center like this, while collapsing the corners in. And I think what we learned is let's not do the petal fold. Even if the paper sticks out a little bit, it might be a little bit easier to do the square twists later on. Like that. And now we can go ahead and do our square twists. So using my thumb and index finger on one side to pull those corners, and then my other hand to open up that pocket. Like this. And open and gently squash. And in this case, I can see some of those pre-creases. So I can push against it. Try to help me open up these squares a little bit nicer. Like that. And then close it back up. And this one turned out pretty good. And we got one more on the bottom. Kind of doing this one upside down. There we go. And that one was the easiest of all the four, all in a bunch like this. And we have our first set of square twists for the torso armor like that. Now, we have a lot of these square twists to do. We have to do the legs. We have to do the chest, the arms, and then the back waistcoat. So next up, let's do the torso ones. I think these ones should be pretty easy as well. And I'll show this once more on this. And then I think what I'll do is tell you just to go do your square twists. I'll show you which layers to do them on. But to save time in the tutorial, I won't show myself doing all of these square twists. I'll maybe do one from each section, or at least this one, and then just show you the layers, and should be pretty easy. Now, in this case, with my upper torso, you can see we want these two flaps to be free. In my case, this flap got stuck. Now, if it gets stuck, it's just a layer reordering, so just pull it a little bit so that it's free. And that way you make sure you have these two free layers to do our square twist on. And so first step, of course, is to fold the corners to the center like this, and like this. Two more. One over here. All right, so now that we have that, let's actually do these valley folds. I think it did help us a bit, folding the corner to the crease we just made. Like that. And we'll do this on all four corners. I know these top corners are a little bit hard to show because the face is blocking it. It's even blocking my view a little bit, but I'm just folding the corner there. I got one more on the bottom. All right, now we have to valley fold the edge. So we can lift up the edge here. Fold the edge to the middle. And then fold it while valley folding our corners down. This. Right, so now it's folded. And from here we do the square twists. Now, if you're having a really hard time with these square twists, you can practice the same structure on a larger paper. So I think you can fold like an 8x8 grid and just copy one of the structures from the crease pattern. It should be super easy to do. And just practice it on your own if you don't want to practice on your samurai itself. But as you do them, it gets easier and easier. So I don't think you really need to do that unless you really don't understand how these maneuvers are happening. But I think if you made it this far in the tutorial, you probably will be okay. There's another one. Now this area, it's folded cleaner than the first area I was working on. So that's why these square twists are a lot easier to collapse. I think the cleaner you collapsed the section, the easier to be. So the arms were probably going to be the hardest ones just because there's a lot of layers. It's hard to keep that one clean, but that's okay. I think I've shown you an example of a harder one as I was messing around with these, and then an easier example where you can just see the general technique on how to open up these squash folds. All right, so we have this. Now we have our square twists. Pushing like that. This one's a little bit stuck, so I'm going to open it gently. Just try to push that corner. There we go. Good enough. And one more down here. All right, and there we have our square twists. I think I could clean them up a little bit, but if I do that, I'll just do it later. And we have our second quadrant done. All right, so now for the rest, there's a ton. So let me just show you which layers you need to do them on. For the legs, these ones are pretty obvious. We have these two flaps right here. So you'll do it between these two flaps. Same thing on the other leg. On the back waistcoat, this one's kind of obvious too. We've got two right here. I think these ones will be the easier ones to do. And then we have two thicker ones on this side. Might be a little bit tricky on this one, but it's okay. And the last positions are for the arms. And this is probably the most confusing on where to put them. But there's a lot of options actually for which area to put the square twist on, because we actually have more than, you know, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 layers. I think as long as you have one layer below and one layer above, then it should be good for your square twists. I think on the crease pattern, I have it like 2 layers from the top like this down. And that's so that we can wrap this section around the arm and keep that detail, but it's like that's such a small detail. If you'd rather do your square twist on this one instead, I think that's totally fine. Just make sure you have enough of those flaps ready, but I'll probably just do it according to the crease pattern to maintain consistency, which would be right here. So 1 below, 2 above, and same thing here. Yeah, get to that, it's a lot of square twisting, and yeah, just do your best on them. It's not too hard, but again, just take some time to, if it's giving you some trouble, just pop it out. And if you need to use tweezers on this section, you can do that too. Totally fine. And we are back with the completed square twist. So just to go over really quick, we have the shoulders done. We've got the chest done, the waistcoat and the legs, as well as the back waistcoat done. So all those square twists all completed. And if you've done them, you're probably maybe tired of these square twists, but probably pretty good at them at the same time. So hopefully you enjoy that technique, and maybe you can apply that to other models that you kind of see the same structure. But now we are going to continue on some other types of dry shaping. I actually have the original Square Twist Samurai here just for reference for us to use as to what we actually need to work on. So let's have him over here. And I think one thing we're going to just finish is folding whatever we can. That's not necessarily a detail, or maybe it is a detail. So the first thing to notice is actually on the waistcoat right here. Right now we have a tip like this, but we want to widen it into something like this. So let me show you how to do that. It's really simple. We might actually already have one of these pre-creased, but if not, it's totally fine. All we really got to do is with this tip, I'm going to reach under this layer and open just one layer like this. And you can see where it's right now, it's valley folded right there. That's going to become a mountain fold like so. And as you can see, it's going to fold the tip down in order, right, to crease along that. And once we have one, we can do the other side just by untucking that layer as well. So I'm untucking the layer, folding the tip in, and then right at the hinges, we're folding a mountain fold along the diagonal. Now you might wonder, this doesn't exactly look like it yet. So what we just need to do is fold basically this layer in half. So right, if this is the edge and this is the line I'm folding to, I'm going to mountain fold that edge behind about half. And I know it's kind of hard to see, because everything is so in the way. It's a little bit hard to see exactly half. So maybe look at it underneath like I'm doing, line it up, and just get it as close as possible. Just like this. Like that. That way you can see how it kind of matches up on the other side. The same thing over here. Now I would say if you are folding this and you're a little bit inaccurate, it's better not to fold too far. It's better to fold a little bit under, just so you still have room to shape. So in this case, I don't necessarily want to go past that line I'm folding to, and a little bit before it is totally fine. Like that. Looks pretty good. There you go. So now we have like an even border on the left and right side. Now we still kind of want that even border on the bottom here. So even on this one, I actually valley folded and tucked it in even a little bit further. So we can go ahead and do that. And this is just a little bit, this is not an exact reference. I'm just kind of eyeballing the distance, It's going to be a little bit longer than right here because I still want this kind of corner. So it's not going to be exactly in half. Maybe it's like a third. Or a little bit less than a third. And it's not, again, it's not fully even on the bottom here, but we have that side like this. And basically what this is going to allow us to do is when we do shaping like this, we have an extra little bevel that we're going to be folding across. And if we need to, we can adjust it later. But I think for now, this is totally fine. We'll work with this. All right, next up, we have some more swivels to do. So let's actually work on the torso ones. This one is kind of similar. We are folding this one thinner. So again, it's going to just fold in half behind. Now, in order to do that, we see this little area right here, when we fold this layer in half, it's going to do like a squash fold. So I'm folding this in half like this. You can see how the corner is now opening up. And to let it lay flat, you want it to squash fold at the top there. It's just going to be a tiny little squash fold. Just like that, increase it down. That way we have kind of that difference in thickness here. Same thing on the other side. Crease like this. And let it squash fold right in that top corner. Just like this. All right, so now when we flip it over, looks something like that. If you notice that even if you folded it to the line, if it's a little bit inaccurate here, I'm going to actually widen out this part. Or maybe I'll fold the top part in a little bit more just to make it more parallel. Because the front angle is the one we care about. There you go. So I adjusted that, and now I just need to adjust the squash fold a little bit more. There you go. That looks a little better. A little bit more even, just like this. All right, next up we have a little bit of details in the knees, and that's with this area right here. So we can see there's like the top of the greave is right here, and then this is kind of like the knee detail right here. And the way to do that is actually using these ridge squashes that we created earlier, right? This flap and this flap. So I can't remember which direction your flaps are folded, but make sure that this bottom one, which is squared off, is valley folded upwards, right? Valley folded upwards. And the pointy one is folded downwards, so like this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start on the top one. And what you want to do is actually, depending on how, or because of the way we kind of sync folded along here, we can actually valley like a swivel fold that goes from the center. So basically from inside the center of the hinge to this corner, and then the center of that hinge down to this bottom corner here. So once you start to fold it, you'll naturally kind of feel this opening. And like this part is actually, this underneath part flattens, and then we have to make some new creases over here, and we make them up to the center line, and it creates this like zigzaggy kind of structure here. And you may need to fold this down actually just to let it crease in place like this before you valley fold it back up. But let's do the other side as well. It should match up pretty nicely. So once again, I'm just reaching one layer under and basically popping this way so I can fold it and allow a new crease to form that swivels this flap down and open like that. And then let this valley fold back up. You can see it just makes a little bit of a small detail here. I don't know, this is kind of just like a texture thing that I find looks nice, and we can use it to help define where the knee should be a little bit. Let's do that quickly on the other side as well. So I'm reaching inside, allowing it to push and swivel open from the center, like this. You can see that this mountain fold got created and the rest of this is kind of flattened out. Same thing on the other side. Just like this, and we can now valley fold this back up. We have matching knees. Now we need to create this section. And I'm going to show you. We haven't really folded the ankle yet, so there's not too good of a reference I can point out to you, but we're basically doing a valley fold that swivels the top corner a little bit. to make just a little bit of a 3D kind of texture that defines this as like a greave or a something, a shin guard type armor piece. So that occurs on this squared off flap right here. And I think to be safe, what we can do is from our previous pre-creases, we can see this corner down here. We can use that as our reference for where to fold to. And then let's use the, there's another reference point maybe we can use, which is, right, we have this pre-crease that goes diagonal. And the intersection between the diagonal and the hinge line here is where we can valley fold. So I'm going to valley fold from that crease to this corner here, like this. I'm just trying to focus on this valley fold first, not worrying about the top. All right, and once I have this valley fold, now I can squash fold this top part a little bit. Now it's not a super easy squash fold because there's some things in the way. It's like a little mixed squash fold of a few different layers. It's almost like a mix of a squash fold and a spread sink. But just try to get this triangle shape. And then whatever triangle shape you get, you're going to try to match that on the other side as well. All right, so we have that triangle shape. Let's do the same thing on the other side now. So once again, this bottom corner that my thumb's pointing at, and then the intersection between the hinge line and this diagonal line that's going up. That's our valley fold. And you can see I'm using my thumb to kind of pre-crease in that fold without fully committing to it yet. That helps me be accurate to the reference point, especially when the folds are a little bit smaller. All right, so we've got that valley fold. Now we need to do that spread squash or squash fold type thing. So I'm gonna let this corner very gently open and just try to make it look like the other side. It's being a little bit stubborn, doesn't want to open all the way. We're going to try to get it to gently open for us. All right, just about got it. Now it's not like exactly matching, so I'm just going to adjust it a little bit more until it matches a bit closer to the other side. So I need to stretch it a little bit farther. All right, that's closer. There you go. So again, the references are a little bit secondary. The more important part is that they just kind of match each other on both sides. That's the best to your ability. All right, so now same thing on the other leg. Let's get that valley fold down. Get a triangle to open here. Same thing on this side. Open the triangle. It's a little bit too big. All right, so the two different legs, they're a little bit different thicknesses. That's something you can fix on yours a bit later, but this shouldn't matter too much. They're roughly the same. But that's that. I think we have one more thing we can work on the leg, and that is going to actually be for the toe. right now our toe is sunken in, right? There's like a little pocket right here. Or if we remove that valley fold, right, it's kind of tucked. What we want to do is invert this pocket. So there's two ways to think about it. If you look at it from the underside, you could think of it as a close sink, but that might seem a little scary to some people. The other way you can think of it is just open up the layer a little bit and like unwrap the flap and then rewrap it back. Or you can think of it as an unsink. So you can grab these two layers here, which I think the unsink is maybe the easier version. You just grab these two layers. It's very similar to the unsinks we did earlier on the same leg. Just gently pull the corner out like this and refold those mountain creases. They were originally valley, and then just valley fold the toe down, which is just flipping another crease. Now we have that point right here. And if we valley fold this up, we've, unsunk or sunk through that little tip to make this triangle shape, which we can use for our shoes later. I'm going to do that very quickly on the other side. I'm going to treat this one more as a close sink, pushing it from underneath until it pops through the other side. And kind of repair the creases. And then fold the tip back up. And lastly, fold the small tip up. So yeah, it's a very simple move. The description may be scary, but now it looks a little bit nicer. All right, so the next part I think we should work on is actually the face details. We're not going to do the whole helmet yet, but I have this test fold to kind of show what we're going for with this dry shaping. And this is for the visor and the face or the mask, which, if you look closely, basically we've defined a nose and then we've actually opened up the mouth a little bit to kind of show teeth. And this isn't like a super historical looking samurai, but it kind of gives the essence of a samurai mask with a little twist. And I think it looks pretty good on the square twist samurai and should, be not too hard to render on your fold. It's a little bit different than this one, but it's pretty much the same. I just think it's a little bit improved. Now, I think the key thing to notice on how I did this, right? You can see it's not too many folds, but I'm focusing on making the nose small. Actually, even this one, I think it's too big, but then you can pinch it to make it 3D. It'll be a little bit smaller. And then I'm making, instead of eye flaps, right? Our eyeballs don't stick out of our heads. They're sunken into our skull. If you actually look at anatomy, or you can just look at a skull and eye sockets make sense. So it's easy to convey eyes by having a hollow instead of having like a flap that sticks out. Just kind of works a little bit differently. So I'm using some shadow here by just valley folding this, edge of the flap down. So it's a very simple structure actually, and it just sells the effect of being a face. And then this top part, the visor, just rounded out, right? So that's pretty easy. We'll get to that a little bit later. It does kind of do a 3D crimp to stick out, but you can kind of, again, see the similar result on the square twist samurai. I think this one, I just didn't do any mouth details, and I think the nose is a weird shape. And you can't really see any eyes. It'd be from this angle, the shadow casts it a little bit, but it's not super strong. So we're going to try to actually improve the square twist samurai a little bit. Now, the way to do that, let's work on the mouth first, just because this flap is really small. I'm going to zoom in camera, I think a little bit. Hopefully it's in focus. So what we're doing with the mouth, remember, it's okay if your mouth wasn't super precise, but hopefully it's like roughly in this structure. We're going to valley fold the bottom lip down a little bit. And what's going to happen there is these corners will have to do a little bit of a squash fold on each side. It's kind of like a double spread squash, a little bit while we do that. So I'm going to try to do it just with my thumb. I'm using both my thumbnails just to start the crease of where I kind of want it. We don't want to pass the chin, right? So this is just a very small opening like this, right? You can see I've only opened it that far. You can see how now the corners are starting to lift, and the way those corners lift, that's how we can squash fold them down. Like that. And that's just going to help frame the mouth a little bit. Like this. And that's all we have to do for now. On this example, you know, we've then thinned out the chin a little bit, but we're going to thin out the chin afterwards. But now our mouth is framed a little bit tighter, like this. Okay, next is we're going to start on the nose. So the way the nose works is actually we have to do some swivel folds beforehand. I'm going to move these flaps out of the way. We have this nose right here. We've got flaps like this. And what we want to do is actually swivel this crease down a little bit. It doesn't go all the way down to the corner, but it swivels a little bit so that you can see how it's swiveling inwards towards the nose, right? Maybe let me show the other side first, just because it's a little bit more precise. You can see it a little bit easier. So I'm opening this pocket. I'm, you know, flattening, almost like adding a mountain fold on the top edge here. From the center down to about here. Again, not all the way to the corner, just a little bit. You know, see how it's not even anywhere close to the corner. Maybe it's so that this corner touches close to the corner. But in this way, I get a little bit of room to add a space for where I want the nose. And the nose, I want to try to get it as thin as possible. Really thin. If you think it's thin enough, it probably isn't. And this might be really hard, like even on mine, I'm having trouble trying to get it really thin. I'm being very careful to get a new mountain fold. That is a very thin nose. You know, the biggest mistake I see people make when folding my designs, and in general, and even humanoid designs in general, is they make the head too large. And all the features too large. So in this case, we want a really small nose because we're going to be shrinking down the face a lot in order not to have too big of a head. Okay, so I've done the left side. You can see, right, there's just a little bit of an edge right there. I'm going to try to match that same thing on the opposite side here. To the best of my ability. Small little crease like this. That way I can get the nose and just try to line up the nose the exact same. Just using my thumbs, pushing against the paper a little bit. Try to get that. There we go. And the reason why we didn't want to fold this in too much is because we are using that corner to help us make the frame of our mask, right? Like this. All right, so now we realize the nose is sticking out too much, and we have these weird triangle things to the side here. What we're going to do, which you may need tweezers for, but we're going to add a tiny swivel fold underneath the nose in order to hide this extra paper here. And so you can kind of just push it in a little bit like this on both sides, and it's going to valley fold the tip of the nose downwards, which is good because we want to shorten the nose, and it's actually a really tiny squash fold. I don't know if you can even see that on the camera, but it's a very tiny squash fold forming on the tip of the nose like this. And it's going to shorten our nose a little bit. It's also going to make it a weird triangle or trapezoid shape. But then from here, once we have that squash fold, we're going to fold in the corners a little bit to round the nose and to make it a little bit more nose shaped again. So I'm just very gently pushing the corners in. Again, this is a super tiny detail. really try to the best of your abilities, and you can use tweezers if you want. Just round out a little bit till we get our nose like this. All right, now we still have our nose a little bit too far down the face. It's still blocking the mouth a little bit. We need to raise it just slightly. So we have this valley fold here. I'm just going to pull the valley fold a little bit higher. So I'm just changing where the valley fold is just a little bit so that I can see where the nose wants to be. And what we want to imagine is if this is the top lip, the nose just sits a little bit above the top lip. And you can use your own face as reference. You can try to measure the space between your own top lip and the nose. And that's where it should be. And our top lip is just basically this line right here. So I'm going to have it sit right on top of that so that we've framed our mouth like this. That. All right. Just like this. Make sure that's secured. All right, our next step is to do this eye thing, which if you take a look on how I did this here, it's basically a valley fold, just a valley fold on the top over the nose. And then on the sides, right, they kind of angle down a bit, but I continue to valley fold down the sides. And by doing so, it grabs a lot of the layers in the back and kind of squishes down. So it might squash some of the internal layers. It won't really make a squash on the outside, but it should kind of affect some of the internal layers. So it holds in place like this. Now, for this, I think the mistake people are going to make is they're going to make it too wide. So they're not going to fold close enough. You know, the eyes sit very close to where your nose is. Again, you can look at your own face and measure the distance from the side of your nose to where your eye is. And there shouldn't be much distance at all. And then it's just an eye length to where it ends. And that's kind of where we want this to end. And yeah, just use your own face for reference. But that's the goal, basically. So I'm going to valley fold starting at the, top of the nose here. Get that valley fold going. And then as our paper kind of slants down a little bit, I'm going to keep that valley fold going down to this corner now, where it's going to fold inwards. And just try to frame in where the eye should be. And do that on both sides. Something like this. I think that's pretty good here. Now it can take some adjusting, and we haven't wet folded this yet. So this whole area might move around a little bit as we're working on it later. But if you at least have this general structure ready, it should be easy to put it back into shape once we start messing around with things like the neck. But this face is going to start to warp around sideways, and that will help lock things into place. All right, now I think the last thing to do is the chin. And if you look at my test fold here, I have like 2 folds that I basically did. So the first one is these very shallow mountain folds that just give the face a little bit of an angle instead of being squared off. It's like this. All right, so now it's angled a little bit. And then the second fold is another mountain fold, but it doesn't go all the way. And it mountain folds the bottom jaw, but not the top of the jaw. And that reference, you'll feel the tension right here as to where it can go. And you just, again, you kind of need to have a reference for the jaw in reference to the rest of the head. So play around with where that actually goes. But this one won't fold flat. It's going to fold in like this so that we have a jaw. So all it needs to do is fold about like 45 degrees and just stay right there. So we have a jaw. So let's start with the first one, which is we're just doing a very small angular mountain fold on the chin just to give it some shape. And this is really tiny. Yeah, I used like a 65 centimeter paper. Maybe it's a little bit smaller than 65 centimeters, but it's around there, and this is still tiny. Okay, so I got a little bit of an angle here. Add to the other side to make that chin. And just try to make sure those angles are the same. I think I pushed it a little bit too far on the left side. I'm going to correct that. Let's look at it again. All right, I think that's good enough. And for here now, we need to do the next mountain fold, which tucks the chin, right? Like this. There's some tension here. Just try to get that mountain fold for the chin. And it won't even allow it to fold all the way. So it just kind of goes to there. And I'm going to try to do the same thing on the other side. And spend a good amount of time on this section to really try to get, you know, a good looking jaw or a properly sized looking jaw. Because I think it will matter a lot to the final face on how good this is. And yeah, again, even if you get something you like now, as we keep shaping, it might change later on. But we'll leave it at this for now. I think I'll maybe do more later down the line when I do some wet folding in the next part. But to kind of get a glimpse of what it will be like is now that these are folded into the jaw, I can grab the sides of where the eyes are and kind of try to pull it into a curve. So I'm rounding the face just a little bit like this, right? And that is going to be what ends up being the mask right here. So just make sure this is something that you like for now. You can clean it up, do whatever. I've seen some people make the jaw a little bit more apparent, so it looks more like a mask, or add fangs. You can add some details there if you have room. But something like this would be kind of proper. And yeah. All right, lastly, we have the visor. So the visor is this flap right here, and it's going to sit on top of the eyes like this. Right, so if you just kind of hold it, you know how we were starting to round a face? If we now round that valley fold thing kind of around it, it's not really creating any fold, but there is like a certain tension that will hold it in this like slightly concave axis. And that's, you just want to understand where that is in relation to the rest of your face. Just so you can like visualize it like right above there, right? And once you have that, now we need to round it out a little bit. So if I look at the original Square Twist Samurai, you see how I've rounded the corners of the visor a bit. I didn't really shrink the visor at all, but I just rounded the corners in with a few valley folds. And they kind of look like this. Let me get this in focus. Underneath, right? It's just tiny little valley folds and swivel folds underneath the visor so that it looks rounded on top. And this one was a little bit sloppy because it was a test fold, but I encourage you to try really hard to get a nice rounded corner. It's not like making a semicircle or anything, but you know, this sharp corner here is not looking too good. So I'm going to try to maybe rabbit ear this in slightly, like from this side and then this side. And just by doing that one rabbit ear, I've already kind of created a curve. And I'm just going to massage, you know, random parts of the paper until I think that curve is kind of balanced, like this. Right now it's starting to curve. Now I'm going to try to do the same thing on the other side, just to match the curves. And this is the hard part, is actually trying to match the first one. So it doesn't look too sharp or too round. Just taking some care to try to match up where I folded on the other side. The part needs to be pushed in a bit more and squeezed, massaged a bit. And I think for now, at least for the tutorial, I'll be satisfied with this. All right, so it's rounded a little bit. Now the whole thing together will look something like this. And that's looking pretty solid, gotta say. All right, it's looking good for the face. Obviously, we have not worked on the helmet yet. We're gonna get to that in a little bit. I think another easy thing we can do now is actually on the back of our samurai. So I'm gonna show this one, and I'm gonna show this one, and let's zoom out fully. All right, so on the back, it's got this closed back thing that kind of terminates where the sheath is. Now, we haven't really worked on the sheath yet. We can do the fold, but it's going to be easier when it's wet to get it to be clean like this. And this isn't even that clean when you look at it from the top, but you know, as clean as possible, basically. But this closed back, all you really need is to give it some pleats. So it's not going to, it's kind of too long right now, right? If I hold everything in place, you see, if I lay it really flat like this, we basically have 2 extra units of length that get in the way of the sheath. So we need to shorten that. And we can do that by adding some pleats. And I want the pleat direction to be like this, where it's mountain, then valley, cascading downwards. Now on this fold, I kind of had it a little bit messy. So I was only able to fit 1 or 2. This is kind of like a half pleat. But on this one, we're going to do a little bit more. Now, the thing is, we have to kind of compensate for the neck a little bit. So ideally, you might think to start your pleats, 1 unit down from the neck or from the helmet. We're going to actually start it like 2 units down. We're going to start it right here instead, because it's going to drag upwards when we actually fold the neck. So on this one, right, we have that grid line. We're going to mountain fold here. And we're going to do a very tiny valley fold afterwards, because the thinner these pleats are, the more you can do without it getting too short. So I'm going to try to mountain valley like this. Like this. And these crimps they're actually represented in the crease pattern. If you look at a crease pattern here, that's what these things are. They're not exactly in the correct spots, but it's just to represent that it exists, right? And then from here, I'm going to put another one. We're going to try to make it look like it's a whole grid unit down, I think. So not necessarily on this, well, maybe on the grid line will look okay. Let's try that. Let's do the same thing on the next grid line. We're going to see how this looks. This might be too close to the previous crimp or pleat, but we're just going to try. Just making a very tiny valley fold after that mountain. All right, and then if we compare to how thin it is right now, we basically want to get it to be about like what we just need to shave off 1 unit. So I think we can add 1 more safely. And let's just do 1 more right here on the grid line. Just like the others. And I think this will be the proper length that when we get to the posing, which includes shaping of the neck, by the time we consume some of this length in the neck, I think this will sit nicely on the back to do that closed back. And once we have these pleats, the last thing I want us to do is this center line is going to be pretty weak. So if we were to mountain fold on it, it might break the paper. So what I want to do is go to the sides of the center and add a mountain fold. Just like kind of push into that crimp we made, not on the center, on just a little bit to the sides of it. And this will give a little bit of flexibility to the sides of the spine, to allow it to bend outwards without breaking the paper in the middle. Right, so we're just kind of rounding out. It's kind of hard to show this, but that way, like if I were to round it this way, you can see how now the tension is going to those mountain folds and not just directly to the center. So I'm just using basically my thumb underneath the guide and then my thumb on top to just push a little curve into the back, right? Because we do want our armor on the back to kind of concave outwards. That really sells the closed back feel. Right, so then if we were mid shaping like this, we had our back. If our back isn't concave outwards, it's going to look like a little too thin, in my opinion. But now it'll look kind of like this, and we have some more depth to the back armor. So even on this one, it's not the greatest, but our back isn't exactly, it's not concave, it's convex, I guess. So we have, it actually looks like the back is a bit more filled out, like that. That's the goal of this step, is to add that extra curve and the ability for the paper to do that curve through all those layers. You know, we might be able to get away with doing one last pleat here. I'm a little bit afraid that it's going to be too short, but if it is, we can fix it later. So let's actually get this last grid unit. I think it'll look more cohesive with this last grid unit in place. Tiny little crimp, just matches the rest of the ones we just did on top. And then also add that little curve that we did to the others as well. Right, there we go. So now we have a pleated back, this, that can curve and bend in. All right, so that is a lot of the dry shaping done. Let's see what we got next. All right, I think the next thing we can work on is actually the sword and the sheath. We're going to start with the sheath here. Now, one thing I want you to note is the sheath, it's pretty simple that I have it shaped. And the the important part is the direction that you valley fold this. So you can see that the valley fold, it's the edge of where the fold lies faces the back. And that way it looks like the sheath has a little opening where you can imagine the sword will fit into, right? It's like a tiny small detail. It logically doesn't make sense in terms of the size, but it's just like a tiny detail to catch people's eye. They hopefully won't really think about it too much, but that's kind of the goal. Just have that tiny little lip that way. Have the blade or the sheath edge facing this way. And so basically what we need to do on our fold here is we have to imagine it kind of closed up in the back. So we have these layers together. We have the waistcoat in the back here, and it kind of traps a lot of the layers over here. And we want to try to swivel the sheath backwards in like this direction, kind of in, you know, the pose where the samurai would be hanging onto it, where that, you know, it's kind of out of the way on the back of the belt or whatever. And from here, we're going to make a mountain fold through these layers. Again, a mountain fold, trying to do them all evenly. The hardest part about this is it likely won't stay, and a lot of these thicker internal layers will start to creep out. That's okay. We're just trying to get the imprint of that fold first. The other thing that's going to happen is in this area where it's connecting to the body, this is going to get very thick. And what you want it to do is actually push outwards this way. It'll give us a little bit more flexibility to fit over our waistcoat, as well as keep it a little bit more in line. So you can see that's where it connects to the body, and it's bulged outwards a little bit so that I can actually fold straight. Okay, it's a little janky, but let me kind of show you how this works. So here I'm going to be very strong in pressing all the layers together when I'm folding these mountain folds as I can. I'm going to start with this top half and just try to mountain fold it in half here. Like this. Like that. And I'm not actually going to fold in the center part yet where it connects to the body, but it's just kind of started up till there. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the long part. First squeeze my layers together, then try to get a mountain fold in half with those layers together to the best of my ability. Like this. And then you can see that as I get closer to this area that's connecting to the body, it won't really fold unless I bulge it outwards. But now that I have both sides done, I can squeeze from both sides, bulge it outwards a little bit. So the force is going up this way. So that way I don't exactly have to fold through all the layers, and it keeps this mountain fold clean like this. And we can kind of finish that mountain fold. Now, because it bulged outwards, if I look underneath, you can see all these layers came out here, and that's totally fine. You know, it's probably going to happen a little bit. You can try to stuff some of the layers back in, but ultimately it won't really, you know, be nice until we either glue those layers together or use methyl cellulose so they kind of, you know, fit and get a bit more compressed together. But try to have this clean mountain fold like this. Right, so now we can imagine, looks like that, which looks very close to this, right? And then this will probably angle forward a little bit for our hand to grab onto. And you can imagine the start of it. Okay, so that's the sheath. Now let's work on the sword. Now, before we work on the sword, I want you to look at actually how the blade is formed on the Square Twist Samurai. It's a little bit weird. The mountain fold edge is actually right here. Generally, people use this as the edge of swords just because, you know, when you crease it, it seems sharp. But in this case, I actually have the folded edge as the blade. It's just very thinly folded and compressed so that it gives the essence of a blade. And even if we have that layer creeping a little bit, the texture gives, you know, it's almost like it's the sharp end of a blade. So that's that little illusion that kind of makes it okay to make the katana. Now, the other thing you need to know that the katana is thinner than this. So what's going to happen is we're going to have to fold these layers into quarters, which makes the paper a little bit thicker, but it actually helps the blade stay stiff like this. Some of my other models that have a thinner blade, the blade is very floppy. So don't be too afraid of the thickness. And again, the blade is formed from these edges coming together, not like that, but by doing an outside fold like this. Right, so it's like this. And when we do this, you can see that it gets interrupted by this other flap, which we made from doing the ridge squashes. That's why there are all those bisectors and stuff like that. This is the back of the hilt. So this part is actually this part of the katana. It's that part, it's the back end, which means we need to form the front end of the handguard, which happens from this area. So what we can do is if we fold this back flap outwards, you can already start to see it on mine, but we have a grid line over here, and it's not going to fold exactly on the grid line. It's going to fold a little bit of an angle downwards. You're trying to actually create something similar to this angle here, but essentially, if we convert these mountain folds into like starting from where the grid line is, but maybe angling down a little bit, it's almost like we're doing a rabbit ear. So maybe like right there and right here. And we may need to adjust this, but right, I'm folding it outwards like this, like a rabbit ear, you can kind of get that shape, that angled shape of our handguard that we want. Okay, so like this, right? We can see how we get the handguard, but we don't want the sword to be at the edge of the handguard, right? We want some space between the handguard and where the blade starts. So once we have that in position, we want to actually kind of like squeeze down to make sure the blade doesn't start. So I'm squeezing like right here. It doesn't start from the edge. And then it might, move around some of these folds that we created in order to get this to exist. But you might be wondering like, hey boys, isn't this the wrong direction of the blade? And yeah, that's correct. We're just setting this front part of the hilt for now, because later on it's going to basically outside reverse fold on top of this new structure in order to form that, right? But we need that. It's a lot easier to create the angle first and then worry about the blade. So work on this a little bit more so it sticks over the top. It's like that. And then imagine the outside reverse fold, kind of like this. And we can always push in the corners. Like if this is really being stubborn, it's okay. All right, so I haven't really folded anything super concretely, which is totally fine. This edge is probably going to be too long as well once we're done. So even on my other samurai, these will have to be shortened a little bit just with mountain folds. We don't have to worry about that. Let's worry about the actual blade. So remember, we're doing like an outside reverse fold here, but these edges here need to fold to the center first. Now, we don't fold it all the way through because, we have to terminate it around there. But basically, right where this is, you just valley fold till there. So I'm going to do a valley fold of this corner to the inside. Now, because it's folding in half, you want to leave a little gap in the center. You don't want to actually fold to the center line. Otherwise, it's not going to fold nicely into a blade. So I'm leaving a little bit of a gap, trying to keep the layers from the side together as much as possible. But because we're doing it this way, it actually helps create like a cleaner edge. All right, try to get that. And then now I'm going to try, right, if I fold it like this, see how the blade's thinned? I'm going to try to match the opposite side to that side. So on paper, there might not be the exact same reference. All you need to do is make sure that when this blade is folded in half, the edges line up. So it's more about eyeballing the second part of the blade. So like this area doesn't fold higher than the opposite side and vice versa. Try to match it together like this. Then I can finish the rest of the blade folding down this way. And then I can do like a little trial of now folding the whole thing in half like this. And again, don't worry about anything going on here. It's not going to work yet. But now we can see we have our blade. And if we need to adjust anything, so I need to adjust that part a little bit. I need to fold it in a little bit more, right? We want to do this before we fully commit. There we go. Just check if this lines up again. It's looking pretty sharp. Yeah. All right. So yeah, obviously this isn't going to stay yet. But what we can do from here is if as you're closing, you can see that these layers are starting to do their own swivel folds. And we're going to use that to our advantage. We want those swivel folds to go as deep as possible and transition in these corners for where our outside reverse fold kind of forms. So try to continue these lines down and into these swivel folds. So I'm pushing and pushing It kind of looks something like this, right? Like this. And now we can squeeze these together. And if these layers are in tightly, it's going to almost do like another rabbit ear type maneuver. It's like a double rabbit ear on both sides. Like this. Now, the last thing you want to pay attention to is where is this ending up? So as you can see, my blade currently is too far backwards, actually. I think oftentimes it's easy to make it too far forwards. Right now it's too far backwards. So I need to scoot it up a little bit. So I'm going to scoot up these creases on like the first rabbit ear a little bit. Squish this down. Now I'm going to try to do that double rabbit ear again in the next spot. Like this. There you go. And I think that is a fine place for it to be. We're going to have to study this a little bit more, or, you know, maybe adjust it a little bit more, but something around here. Again, it is hard to tell because we haven't like folded everything yet. And this hilt isn't being most responsive. It's being a little bit stubborn. I guess it's not super nice like that. But we can fidget with it until it is all good, especially when we wet fold. You know, so maybe I went too far forward on that one. So you kind of have to wiggle it to try to see, you know, where is a spot where it looks good, where the layers are kind of matched up. And it kind of makes sense in terms of a handguard. And I think that is actually good. I think we've nailed it just like that. And so now I can, you know, crease a little bit harder here for it to remember. And we'll save this for wet shaping. Once we wet shape it, these layers will stick together a lot nicer. And we won't have as much creeping out the side like that. Ideally, we won't have any. You can see here how nicely it's all squished in that double rabbit ear. Right? So these will push in further. And that double rabbit ear will squash even further out. It'll be very nice. Blend in. Let me just clean this up slightly. So try to get that a little bit better. Just like that. Yeah, so this, as you can see, even with just the sword, this is why I tell people not to rush shaping. You know, it's a very delicate process and you have to be, you gotta really have an eye for looking at how to adjust things to make it look good. All right, last thing we'll work on here is the hilt. Now the hilt is similar to the sheath actually. It just folds in half and it's gonna buff outwards a little bit. Like remember how on our sheath, this part like buffed out that way a little bit. The same thing is gonna happen for the hilt a little bit. You can notice that the mountain fold faces outwards towards the blade, right? That just helps give a clean line for the actual hilt when you look underneath the hand. Very small detail, but it looks a lot cleaner like that than seeing a bunch of layers. And it makes it a little easier to wrap the fingers around. Now, we don't have the fingers shaped yet, so we can't do that. But what I'm going to do is this is the side that the mountain fold is going to occur on. I'm going to just try to squeeze the layers together, get a mountain fold. Now, this thing is really thick, so I'm not just pressing in the middle. I'm kind of doing the technique of what I did with this back area, which is adding some mountain folds to the curve on the side of the center line. And that will just help the paper eventually get used to the layers coming together and allow it to kind of push outwards from some of these super internal layers. Like this. to get that mountain fold. And as it mountain folds, as it gets towards this connection with the handguard, it's kind of going to do this weird like swivel motion. Just wherever the paper takes you, try to just follow it, let it do its thing. And the goal is now that the hilt and the blade are sitting on top of each other when you hold it like this, right? So like when a katana is forged, it's one steel tang, right? And then the handguard is added afterwards. So if it's supposed to be one piece, you want it to be, look like it's, straight here like this. So just try to line that up. Again, nothing's going to stay yet. Once we wet fold it, it'll get its memory here. We can do some more small tweaks to it. But that's kind of what you're aiming for. Even with the dry shaping. If it's dry shaped like that, it's going to be easier later on, probably, to line up. Just like that. All right, so we have that arm done. Pretty cool. Yeah. All right. Let's see what's next. All right. So I think the next thing we're going to do, and might be the last thing we do in this tutorial, is the helmet. Now, we're not going to be able to do the full helmet because part of it is going to require the wet shaping portion where we're sculpting the neck, which will then affect how the helmet or the face sits into the helmet. And as you can see, basically the goal is that the tip of the visor actually pushes up into the helmet here. So there's going to be some adjusting needed to be done in this area once we actually fold the helmet. But what we can do is kind of do some pre-folding, I guess, or pre-shaping before that happens, which is just in this upper part to kind of get the horns and also the back area of the samurai helmet. Now, if you look at this carefully, you will notice that it's very three-dimensional. And there are some key points that I will point out in terms of how we're going to try to shape this. There was a few like actual folds, but honestly, a lot of this, I don't really remember everything I did, especially how to get these like divots in the helmet. So we're basically going to look at this square twist samurai and try to copy it on the other one. And to a varying degree, we'll get the exact same textures. At least if we don't get the exact textures, we're going to get something kind of similar. Because yeah, these divots here, they're really cool, and I'm not exactly sure how I actually got them. What we can start with maybe is the back, which is, this should be pretty easy. It's basically a crimp fold upwards and a little bit of swivels on the side. So if I look back here, we have our grid unit. That's pretty great. So we can just use that as our reference. So we can mount and fold along that. Like this. And I know there are some things going on the other side, but we're just going to have to kind of fold through it and ignore those things. And you're going to try to get a little crimp on top. Like that. And I think actually, because there are things in the middle, what I did on this crimp is as I rounded the helmet, which kind of pushes along the center grid line, is the crimp gets shallower towards the middle portion. And that kind of lets it crease in. So kind of like this, where you can see how the center is not exactly folded all the way. I'm going to try to get it roughly to that point, but it's not going to be like a full crimp through the entire layer. And I think if we look at it over here, we can kind of see that same thing going on right there. And yeah, so we're going to crimp it like this. And to really kind of fix the shape, we got to round out the helmet a little bit. And then once it's somewhere that you think kind of looks like this, I'm going to valley fold, or I guess in this case, it's going to be a mountain fold from this bottom corner
up to this grid line. So not to the other corner, just a little bit from that corner or from that reference point down like this. And that way it gives a little bit of a swivel fold underneath. Tiny swivel fold like this to try to keep it in place. It probably won't stay in place for now, but again, we're just doing some pre-shaping. I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. It's a very thin mountain fold. You get a small swivel fold over here. And it's roughly something like this. 3, 2, 1, start. All right, so now we need to work on the front of the horns. And you might see some creases here. I tried to do this once. This is the second take. I actually don't fully remember how I did this Square Twist Samurai one. I have had a tutorial in the past for the Samurai version 3 where I had a similar helmet. I even checked that, and this one's a little bit different. So at least for these horns, we're just going to try to replicate what we see and hope that it works out for the best. But one thing to note is just the position of the horns. They're kind of as wide as the visor here. So we want to make them too close to the center. They want to stick out, kind of around here. So I think the first thing we can do is see how we have these diagonal creases. Let's just make a mountain fold to reinforce those on the corners, because ultimately that is where the horn will be, right? We can do that on both sides, like this. And I think by folding along these corners, we can start to get a little divot between the next grid unit. So if I isolate this unit here, and you can kind of see a divot starting to form here and there. I think that's what we want. If you look on this one, we have those divots right next to it. And basically, if we're folding along the center line, in addition with these grid folds, it'll start to form. Now, we have our horns starting out here, but we need to thin them. So what I'm going to do is actually take this edge and fold like a valley fold. You can see I kind of already have it here. And it's going to be about 1/3 of the way up between this line and here. This, you can kind of eyeball it. It doesn't have to be exact, but just something around there, right? Like that. And it's not going to lay flat. The horns are going to start to raise. And as they are raising, let's now try to re-establish that corner crease to go all the way through like this. You can see how it's now creating that divot there. I think that's how I did it on the first Square Twist Samurai. Something like this. Now let's do the same thing on the other corner. Like that. And basically we started this valley fold, right? From 1/3. And with those mountain folds, it's basically continuing a valley fold to the corner. So it's kind of like a curved valley fold. This one doesn't really lay flat like this. And now if I pull it in, that's kind of about the width that we want for it to start. Now, again, we're going to need to do the wet shaping to actually get this helmet together. But at least this is pretty good progress. I think from here, what we want to do is now add a valley fold over here to help thin the horn even more on this side. Now, one thing I noticed is on this fold, when we do this valley fold, it's kind of swiveling in from this paper and it's leaving this area clean. So it doesn't go all the way to the center here. It leaves a little bit of a gap, and it kind of helps keep the helmet clean. So we want to try maybe to rely a little bit on the other areas. So it's valley fold here. Maybe just a bisector for now, but then not have it go all the way to the edge. Like this. Something similar on the other side. I think we're actually maybe even going to fold the next layer over the top again, but not yet. All right, there we go. We thinned the horns down a little bit on this side. Now we need to thin it on the outside here. And I think what we did for that side is maybe even just fold it in half and kind of swivel it into place. So I'm now going to take this whole flap here and try to bisect the whole thing. Like this. I think when I do this, it's going to indent in the corner there a little bit. Something like this, and see how it's kind of pulling the paper from the helmet underneath. Like that. I think that's what we want. Let's try it on the other side as well. So I'll just fold this all together. It kind of creates a new indent over there. Right, so we have the start of our horns. Now, they're not quite as curved or as thin as the ones on our other square twist samurai yet, but that might be just a matter of cleaning it up a little bit. So I'm going to try to sharpen these horns just by keeping the layers together. A little bit more, like this. Right. I think this is the correct maneuver. And let's try the same thing on the other side. Just keep this a little bit cleaner. Let's try to keep some of the layers a little bit more together. This left side's giving me a little bit more problems, but I think that's kind of okay. And we can fix it with the wet shaping. All right, so something kind of like this, and I think it's looking actually not too bad. It's not looking exactly like this one yet, but I think the more we tweak it, the more we can round it out. I think the last thing I want to do here is add the kind of curved mountain fold down the center here again. So we have it kind of in the back, right? We don't really have it in the front. We want it in the front though. I'm also refolding this pleat that we put in the back earlier, making sure it doesn't go away after we maneuvered a bunch of stuff. I'll fold this back. There we go, make sure it's okay. Make sure the center line is reinforced. And then I'm basically going to be holding the two corners that formed here and trying to get this mountain fold in the center to be a bit more prevalent. I don't really know if I can get it on the top layer here without wet folding first, but I think this is kind of okay. This is the right direction we're going in. Something like this. All right, so this is starting to look a little bit like the back of the helmet on our square twist samurai. You can really see that the square twist one is quite nicely curved. So I think on this one, once I wet shape, I'm going to have to change some of the curves here to compress the head in a little bit and make it a little bit cleaner, more round. So you can play around with just like pressing where the layers kind of want to be to try to, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine, but you kind of want it to be clean. So whatever looks like it's starting to be clean for you or rounded. Like here, I have this wrinkle here. I don't really want that. So I'm maybe going to try to smooth that out a little bit. Just allow the existing creases to shine through a bit more. And that should be good. And then last thing to mention is once we do the wet shaping, remember the visor here will actually come up on top of this, or this will come down and reach this point and close. And that's kind of going to be a whole process on its own. Part of it is going to help keep the face curved and also define where the neck is. On this design, we don't have really enough space for much of a neck, unfortunately, but we're going to do our best here and try to get our neck just as good as we can. But I think for now, this is enough folding or dry shaping before we get to wet shaping, which is going to be quite the journey in and of itself. But hopefully from this point, you can kind of see what's going on. All right, so I think this is it for the dry shaping video. We might be able to do some other small things, but I think it's best saved for the wet shaping video, which I think will be the longer shaping video, but we have things like smooth out these corners. And then once it's methyl cellulose, we can fold these bevels in. And in the next video, we're also going to work on the leg pose and, opening some of these flaps to add depth to the legs, all that sort of stuff. So look forward to the next shaping video. This is kind of the, preparation for that one. So I hope that everything here made sense and that your samurai is getting ready to be fully shaped. But yeah, thank you so much for watching and folding along, making it through this tutorial. I'll see you in the next one.
All this origami, all this origami, all this origami got me going kamikaze now.